Thanks for joining us for this episode. And I wanted to remind you that you actually can watch video versions of each episode by subscribing to the Church Advance YouTube channel. All you got to do is head over to youtube.com/@churchadvance or see the link in the show notes, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel there. Of course, you can follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you may be listening to podcasts, but wanted to give a special plug for the video version. Well, I'm really excited about getting to today's episode as we continue to advance a reformation, a fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches. This is Church Advance with Brian Sams.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Church Advance podcast. This is Brian Sams, your host. Today, I'm excited, man. We have a special guest on the podcast. Normally, it's just me and Luke here talking back and forth, but every once in a while, we are able to bring a guest on. And today, I'm really happy to bring on Pastor Ryan Hayden. So, Ryan, welcome to the Church Advance podcast.
Hey, man. Good to be here.
And Ryan, I don't know. I know we were just talking before we recorded that me and you've never met necessarily in person. But for those in the audience that would not know you, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and your church?
Yeah, my name is Ryan Hayden. I'm the pastor of Bible Baptist Church in Mattoon, Illinois. Small world. I was just checking your back episodes, and Dan Hafley, who's across town, has been on your podcast. And he is a very small town, so it's a very small world. You need to maybe branch out and get some people outside of.
Hey, so hold on. Where is Mattoon, Illinois? Because honestly, I've been all over this country and I have no idea where it's at.
No, I didn't know it was where it was before I moved here. I mean, it's in the central part of the state of Illinois. That's just basically like Iowa. I mean, it's just like flat cornfields, soybeans everywhere. It's a small city, about 20,000 people. We have a company called Rural King, which is sort of like a redneck Walmart that's headquartered here. And that's our main employer. And then we have a university in the next town over. So it's kind of we got everything we need, but you would never have any reason to know about us if you didn't live here. So 50 miles from anywhere.
Well, shout out to Dan, who's also from Mattoon, Illinois. That's really cool. And yeah, we need to get out to, but hey, in those small towns, there's these treasures and churches and good preachers everywhere. Thank God for it. How about family, married and kids?
Yeah, I've been married to I met my wife in college, and we've got 5 kids together. So
hey, me too, man. Look at us.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, when you know how it is, Ryan, when you're in the 5-kid world, all of a sudden, everybody thinks you're a zombie, man. They look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah.
But hey, congrats, man. We have 5 kids as well, age 16 down to 3 in our family. So
yeah, we're 14. We had 3. We have a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 10-year-old, and then we have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So basically, we took a huge break, and then we had a baby, and we're like, oh, might as well do it again. So
right.
We're done now, though. We're not having it anymore.
I hear you. Same thing here. We should just shift the whole focus of the podcast and talk about raising 5 kids with a set of olders and a set of youngers. It is a very unique niche. It's a very unique challenge, and praise the Lord for it. Ryan, again, thanks for coming. The reason I asked you to come on today is somebody sent me an article that you wrote with a really catchy title, and that is Why Your Pastor Has That Edge. And we're going to link to it, obviously, in the show notes. But it was sent to me with a little bit of traction. People have been talking about it, interacting with it online. I'm not on social media, but Luke, our producer, sent it over to me and said, man, why don't you check this out? I read through it, man. It's really, really good article. I appreciate you writing it. I understand the sentiment you're speaking of. But Why Your Pastor Has That Edge is really the actual content is about what it's like to pastor in middle age. Mm-hmm. Now, I got to tell you, man, I just turned 45. So I am, they say, how old are you, Ryan?
I'm only 40. I barely qualify for middle age, if I qualify at all.
Well, it's funny, man. You get 45 and then you think of middle age and say, okay, so I'm halfway done. Well, that means I'd be 90. So actually, like, I think I'm way past middle age, but that's okay. That's a whole nother thing. But I mean, we're talking about guys between like 35 and 50 or something like that. The traditional middle age where you got teenagers or a little older, you've been through it. This is where things like midlife crises come in. People start questioning their calling, their marriages, and all these sorts of things. But that doesn't have to be the case. But at the same time, there are real pressures and challenges associated with being a man in your middle ages and pastoring. And that's actually what the heart of your article was about. I mean, really the pressures of being a middle-aged pastor.
Yeah.
And man, I go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I remember being a kid, called to the ministry, trying to get around pastors as a younger man. And I'd get around guys that were in their, 40s, and I would think, what's wrong with you people? Like, they just all seemed to have the weight of the world on their shoulders. They just had this, like, maybe it was the ones I was around, but they were not easy to get along with. They seemed like they were under constant pressure. And I was like, I'm never going to be that way. And now I'm getting to that age, and it's like, oh, I kind of get it. There was a lot of stuff rolling around in the back of their heads that they couldn't talk about, and I wanted to give voice to that. That's what the article is all about.
That's awesome. And there really is, man. I mean, ministry itself has pressure, but ministry after 20 years has unique pressure because of family and several things. And one of the things we'll talk about that's very evident and transparent in your article is you get ministry worn and people worn. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It just means you've been down that road a little bit, right?
Yeah.
The ideals of what ministry is going to look like from that. I always think like my history with dealing with men in ministry was heavily Bible college students. That was my world. And I have been a Bible college instructor for over 15 years now. And so I live with these 18 to 22-year-olds and all of their ideals about ministry. Oftentimes they get become more realistic as time goes on. So, man, I really appreciate this. This is going to be a word of real help to guys to hang in there and stay on. But number one, so I got 7. We're going to work through these 7 pressures that middle-aged pastors face that can often give them that edge. And the very first one that you put was the first pressure is that people can disappoint you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're a pastor, you have people, hopefully. If you don't, what are you doing? Right. But, you got people, and I don't know if it's a small church thing or a big church thing. I think it's everybody. You have to watch people, sort of in slow motion, make terrible mistakes, and it's hard. It's hard on you, like you know what it's like. Most of the listeners, viewers probably know what it's like. You've been in the room when people, tell their wife they're leaving them and they're not coming back, and you've loved people and poured your life into people and prayed for people, and then they all of a sudden just disappear and they're not in church anymore. Or people sign up to be in necessary places in ministry, and then they just quit without saying anything to anybody. You find out they're going to other churches or something, and it's hard. It doesn't really get easier. You just get used to it, right? Like it's just hard. So,
well, I mean, that's exactly right. And I read another article by a guy who was wrote about how difficult it is when people ghost you. And ghosting is what you described, when people just leave. You just never hear from them. They don't even say anything. And you're thinking to yourself, man, I baptized you. I was there when your child was born within like 24 hours. I remember somebody ghosted me. And I mean, I buried their adult son who overdosed on heroin and cried with. I'm thinking about people who you were there in the hospital when their loved one when they pulled the plug from
Yeah.
a ventilator at COVID. And all of a sudden, man, without warning, without a reason, or even sometimes like ghosting is one thing, but then there's the whole time where they'll come to you and say things like, "Hey, Pastor, don't take this personal. We love you." And you're like, well, wait a second. It's like, how do you not take it personal when your whole life is wrapped up in church and preaching and people?
Yeah.
Man, good night. So I got a question about that. So in your life,
Uh-huh.
how would you say you have compensated, or how has God helped you work through those people things?
Well, I think one of the things that's helped me is you have to disassociate loving people from building your thing, you know?
Hmm.
And so sometimes when people, especially when people leave the church, it hurts for two reasons. It hurts because you love them and you miss them, and maybe you think they're making a mistake. But it also hurts because it hurts your ministry, it hurts your numbers, it hurts your ego to think that somebody doesn't think you're the greatest thing in the whole world.
Wow.
And I found that in my life, I tend to, I'm ashamed to say this, it's the second thing that tends to bother me and wound me more. And sometimes you need those wounds, right? Like sometimes that's the Lord just working in your life, kind of giving you a little bit of humility. And sometimes it is better for people to go to another church. It doesn't make it easier for you as the pastor, but sometimes it is better. And so, I mean, I'm thinking of a family in my church that we loved or was in our church. We loved them. We did everything with this couple. And then one day they were just like, yeah, we don't feel like we're being fed. We think you're a great preacher, but we just don't feel like we're being fed at our church. And then they took off, and it was just like, that hurt for years, like years. I would fall back into depression about that. And I think that's the normal thing for most pastors. I think that's what all of us go through regularly. And, it's not really an easy way to talk about it. So
no, somebody told me one time, when you freely welcome new people into your church, and oftentimes from other churches, right? I mean, you're going to have that happen. You're going to have people come in the doors of your church, and they came from another church. And sometimes it's really exciting because you're like, oh man, they're trained, or they got experience. I mean, I know since COVID, I've had some people walk in our church that stuck to our church, and it was an honest blessing. They were coming from another church, but they have done nothing but bless our church. And I'm like, praise God, man, that's great. But then sometimes I don't feel the same way when a good person leaves my church, knowing that they're going to walk into another church and the same thing is going to be experienced by that other pastor. So if I freely receive, I should have the attitude of freely giving. And you made a great point that I think is just such a great thing for people to hear. My church is not for everybody. It's not best for everybody. It's not like one size fits all. It may be that it's better for us and better for somebody else to be in a different church. It doesn't make them better. It doesn't make our church less. It just means God has a way of doing it, and trusting God with it is a huge deal. So, man, appreciate that. And it's so true, man. People disappoint. I mean, I actually, I was off air. I told Luke I had two families leave our church this week.
Oh man.
And,
sorry.
You're just like, and when you hear it, you're just like, what? And you never saw it coming. There's not even a reason. There's no problem. It's just the way that it works. It's the circle of life and in church life. And not everybody that comes into my ministry is going to be like that lifetime, get in the truck, drive it till Jesus comes. And I've just got to take what God gives and find a way to keep moving. And I appreciate that. Number two. This was a good one. Dreams don't always materialize.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in this little town in Illinois, which I never dreamed I'd end up in Illinois to begin with. I always thought I'm from New England. I always thought I'd end up back in New England. And, but the Lord led us to this little church here in Illinois. I came from this big church down south where everything was top notch. Everything was polished. Everything was perfect, beautiful landscaping. And I came here 12 years ago now, and I thought, a couple years, we're going to be building a new building. We have this tiny auditorium, just like seats 100 people. And, I thought a couple years, we're going to be building a new building. We're going to change all this stuff. Maybe we're going to move our church to somewhere else. And here we are, we're 12 years later, and I'm in the same spot that I started in. Our church has grown considerably, but, things I thought would take 3 years have taken 12 years. And that's heavy on you when you're a young pastor and you get all these ideals and all these dreams and they just don't materialize at all. So
do you think like the dreams you were describing are growth dreams, building dreams, idealistic things related to larger or mega churches? How do you think we can help each other and the younger generation of pastors coming up that are not middle-aged yet deal with dreams and realities? Have we missed the boat with younger preachers and shaping dreams in some ways?
I think we have. I mean, you might disagree with me on this, but the average church size in the United States is like 50, 60 people. That's the average, which means there's a lot of churches that are smaller than that. Obviously, a lot of healthier churches that are bigger than that, right? But I don't know how many of us would have gotten into the ministry if we thought we were going to be long-term pastors of 50 or 60 people, if we're being honest.
Right.
And I went to college, I went to Crown, and at the time, brother, that church was huge, that ministry was huge, and everybody thought they were going to be the next Clarence Sexton. I'm sure it was the same way at West Coast. Everybody thought they were going to be the next Paul Chappell, and that's just not that's not how life works, right? That's
right.
There's a few of them for a reason. So,
well, you think about these Bible college settings, and by the way, I do agree with you 100%. And even if I didn't, you're always welcome here, so it's great. But I actually agree with you. I mean, I wrote my whole doctoral dissertation work on the priority of local church Bible college training and or ministry training and the weakness of Bible college setting training, and it's mainly for this reason. I mean, you've got almost every context of a Bible college is in the setting of a mega church or close to a mega church.
Yeah.
Certainly a large church.
Right.
And so the actual training inherently gives you an unrealistic expectation of what this is going to look like because you nailed it. I mean, averages don't lie. I mean, and it's not like independent Baptist aggressive soul winning churches beat the average. There's still the average independent Baptist church is going to fit in that same. So, by the way, so would SBC or any other church for that matter. That's a statistic. So you don't beat the numbers because you present a heavy outreach philosophy or whatever. It's just not that simple. And I think maybe our dreams should be shaped around more faithfulness and God's ideals of what a shepherd and what a healthy church should actually look like.
Yeah, I'm so with you there. We have in our church, an apprenticeship program. We've got one person going through it right now. I'm praying about adding another person that has some promise and has expressed the desire to be a pastor. These are married guys that have no interest in going to Bible college. And I've just developed a curriculum that I think that they would need to be a good pastor. And we work through it together one-on-one and in the context of a local church. There's so many other ways to do it, but that's just how I'm doing it. And the Lord's blessed our church for that. It's pretty cool. So.
Well, I think it's the future. I think most people realize that there's a certain plague associated with it. And then you talk about the whole married couple thing. Like, I mean, I remember being in California, no slam on anybody. It's the way they do it. It's not a problem. I'm not picking a fight with that model. It's just not my model. It's certainly not my future. I just thinking about the average married family in my church with kids.
Mm-hmm.
Guy comes to me and says, I want to preach. I want to be a pastor. And I say, okay, here's the idea. I want you to pack up. I want you to quit your job. I want you to migrate your family to California or Knoxville or wherever.
Yeah.
And I want you to buy a new house, get a new job. And by the way, on top of all that, I want you to go be a full-time student during the day where you're going to have to get a job at night. I mean, it's chaos. It's crazy. And a lot of times that I've seen a lot of burnout on that edge, man. And it's a frightening thing. So on top of just the model fails, I think even that whole idea of going and uprooting and going somewhere else for training has an inherent mortality rate to it as well. So I appreciate what you're doing, man. And I just want to say to you, man, thank you for faithfully hunkering down somewhere for 12 years and plus and doing God's work in the small unknown places. That's where the heroes are, man. And I appreciate it. And I think you're spot on there. Number three, this is so deep here, but sacrifices hit home. What do you mean by that?
Oh man, I don't know if I want to get into this one. So I'll just tell you my story, and then and then we can apply it to everybody else. So I came here I went to college, ended up working, for a church. What do you make when you're working for a church when you're 20 years old? I think I made like $15,000 a year or something like that. Came here to be the pastor, and the church, small church, 45 people or something like that when we came here. They did the best that they could. We were here serving the Lord. I started a business and doing app development, which was just like a hobby of mine. And then that thing like took off like a rocket. And so I went from making literally like no money, like enough to buy groceries, to six figures and doing really, really well for myself. And, but I didn't want to stop pastoring. I felt called to be a pastor. It was always just sort of a side thing. So I stopped taking a salary or negotiated my salary down to next to nothing at the church. And we brought on some part-time staff at the church when that no regrets about any of this. The Lord really blessed that. And then my son last year and a half or so ago, got sick with some mystery illness. And it was like on top of flying around the country for work, pastoring and preaching 3 times a week. Now I'm taking my son to 2-hour one-way trips to St. Louis or Chicago once a week or so for doctor's appointments, specialist appointments. And it just like, I had to give something up. So I stepped out of business, stepped back into full-time ministry. And it was like, whoa, man, this is tough. This is tough. And it's tougher with the realization of knowing, like, it's hypothetical for most people. Like, what would I be worth in the business world? I knew what I was worth in the business world because I just stepped out of it, and then to look, and it's just like, oh man, like it's tough. It's tough. And then you look at, the firemen, public school teachers, public school principals, not even business people, plumbers. And you just think about what they make and you're like, this is tough. And then add to that, I live 1,200 miles away from my family. So huge part of my expense is going to see them as much as I possibly can. My kids don't have grandparents around to go to piano recitals or sports games or whatever. There's a lot of sacrifices that you make, and you don't really realize it when you're 20 years old. And then when you're 40, 45 years old, it's like that gap. Everybody's poor when they're 20, right? But that gap just gets bigger and bigger. And you're looking at guys that are smart guys, intelligent, stayed married, kept their nose down. They're doing really well for themselves. And you're like, man, I'm barely scraping by here. And it starts to weigh on you. I think that's why a lot of 40-something-year-old pastors quit, is because it's hard.
Absolutely. And to the point, to make the connection for everybody, the point of the average church is, in our mind, relatively small. Although if it's average, it's not really small. You know what I mean? I mean, in our mind, anybody that's got a background from somewhere like West Coast or Crown or some of these bigger church places, anything that's under 100 or whatever, we just automatically think it's small. And then correlating to that is there is a lid on compensation in that setting. Now, I don't want, it's not that there are not certain places in ministry that you cannot do better. I mean, obviously, I think people like Steve Furtick, and they probably make millions. I mean, who knows? I don't know, but they're not poor. they're not pastoring 50 people, in the middle of Iowa somewhere, So, but the point is, it's a realization I think that guys have to make and have to acknowledge that in ministerial work, there can be a lid. And so if like you had a beautiful point, if for a season, compensating your income for one way or the other may be okay for you, and it may not be the big traveling thing like you were talking about, but in order to adequately take care of your family, adequately take care of medical bills, adequately take care of retirement, it may be smart to do another thing or two that can help with that. Often younger, smaller church pastors, their wife would maybe work or something. And if you got young kids in the house, that's not real realistic. And we know that. I know that. You know that. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it is choosing to be in a career, so to speak, that is not necessarily the most lucrative. And a lot of guys end up crossing the finish line and have very little on this earth to show for. But I think we ultimately are trying to keep our eyes on a different place in a different world. And so I appreciate that testimony, man. That's a real thing, man. That's a real issue that most of us are dealing with. Man, that was good. Number four is the fourth pressure that middle-aged pastors face is their trusted friends defect.
Yeah. So my thought on that is just, you see guys you went to Bible college with that are Roman Catholic or something now, or completely out of church, or they've gone over to some position that you would never take. And I think our generation is pretty good about being gracious with each other, and not like you have to toe the line exactly where I toe the line on everything. But it still hurts to, find yourself at odds with people that you started with, and it just seems to happen more and more the older that you get.
Yeah, for sure. So, and there's another defection. You're kind of referring to like theological position or being active in the faith, and the other type that fades away is when somebody chooses to make choices in their life that takes them out of that sphere of ministry. And it's not like you're not their friend. That's not the point. Right. But so much of what you shared, like so much of what your conversation was about, the things that made you friends, like we're going to go serve God. We're going to go preach. We're going to go pastor a church. We're going to, when that crumbles, it changes the whole dynamic of the relationship. You could say I'm always the person's friend, and you should be. I've got friends that have fallen, mm-hmm. and I regularly message, call, reach out to them, and I do genuinely pray for them, and I want the best for them, and I'm trying to be their friend. But it's an immediate issue that strains your relationship, and there's nothing that you could say or do that would change the strain. Look, I don't have many friends that are now, some whacked out faith thing, but mm-hmm. I do have more than my fair share of people that I know who are no longer doing what we all set out to do 25 years ago.
Yeah, same.
That's brutal, man. I hate that. And it is hard, man. I would think it's the same experience on a spiritual level that probably a soldier gets when somebody goes to war with him and doesn't come home. There's that loss and grief and such, I would think.
Yeah.
Man, well, that's a tough
Agreed.
one. Oh, goodness. Number.
Yeah.
I love number 5 because number 5 is like my world here. So, another pressure on middle-aged pastors is that criticism is unavoidable.
Yeah, I mean, you can't please everybody. What's the old saying? If you want to please everybody, sell ice cream, right?
Yeah, and then somebody's gonna be mad because you don't have Rocky Road, or whatever.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
But man, I think COVID was just that year, 2020, between COVID and Donald Trump and the elections. That was the most brutal year of trying to keep everybody, together in church, because it was just awful. It was awful. But pastoring any size church exposes you to criticism. Anytime you're a leader, you're exposed to criticism constantly. People don't like the decisions that you make. People don't like the positions that you take, whatever. And sometimes people are not the nicest in the way that they pointed out, or the most gracious in the way that they pointed out. Sometimes people use you and your positions for their own gain. They'll take shots at you to pick themselves up and maybe get themselves a little bit of cred. And it's tough. I wrote in here in church, I've had people leave the church because they accused me of being a Calvinist, which I'm not. And then I had one guy last year leave the church when I preached through Romans 10, when he found out that I really wasn't a Calvinist, so it's constant. Music, people are always criticizing one way or the other, it's wild. So
yeah, some things that have helped me here. Maybe I'd like to get your opinion on maybe a couple things that have helped you, but there's been 2 things that God has taught me through criticism, and I've had my fair share. The podcast has been a place where I've received some criticism, and of course I've been through immeasurable church issues here as well. So there's 2 things that people have shared with me that have been helpful. One, I don't take criticism from somebody I would not take advice from. So if you're just out there chirping and you're just out there talking and we don't have a relationship and there's no reason for me to really particularly care, I'm just not going to give much credibility to that. But I have some really good friends. Last night I was getting advice from 2 of my closest friends in ministry. One's Kurt Skelly and one's Pastor Brent Armstrong. And I was getting some advice from them. Mm-hmm. And they can speak freely and tell me, hey, Brian, you're like, your thinking's off here. Like, what are you doing here? And I take that because I know they care about me. They love me. We're friends. Mm-hmm. And they really want to help me. But just some parrot out there just chirping what he's always heard and has no, like, there's a guy, this was really funny. I had a guy send me a message through, I don't even know him. This was like through the internet. And he was just, I just would, I'd love to hear you're softening down your message. You're softening down your Bible. I'd love to hear you. I'd love to hear your sermon on this or whatever. So I wrote him back, and I sent the sermon he was requesting. And then I sent him an additional link to a sermon that I preached a few weeks before on hell. Uh-huh. And I just said in the PS, hey, P.S. I think you're implying that you think I'm a soft preacher. In case that's what you're implying, here's a message on hell. Why don't you try that one on and see how, see how you like it. So I just tried to dish it back to him a little bit. Not that I wasn't trying to be a bully. It was just like, come on, man. Like, I don't really care what you think. So and again, I don't want to be just callous, but at the same time, I can't listen to every person that has something to say. Number 2, somebody showed me this from scripture years ago when Shimei is cursing David. Mm-hmm. And David says this to his right-hand guy. I can't remember the guy's name. It was Abner. I can't remember who it is. He says, let him curse. It may be that the Lord told him to curse me, essentially, so God could bless me. I mean, that just leveled the playing field for me, Ryan, when I'm like, you know what? It's okay. It maybe God wanted him to say that to me, but maybe that was said to me only so that God could rush to my defense and God could bless me because of what somebody else said about me. Man, I tell you what, that like evened out the way I feel about people speaking about me or speaking ill about me. How about you? Anything come to mind, like, you know, how you, as a pastor, maybe how you process or deal with something like criticism?
I think motivation plays a big role, you know, like, who do I work for?
Oh, that's good.
You know what I mean? Do I work for you or do I work for the Lord? Am I serving the Lord? At the end of the day, I think that's the number one answer to all of these things, is that we are serving the Lord. And it's to our success isn't determined by any outward metric. I can't talk. Our success isn't determined by any outward metric. Our success is determined by whether the Lord says, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." You know, so it's like, that's the thing that matters. And if you were right, you know, I think I heard Mark Dever, I think, in a podcast recently, was talking about how early in his ministry, somebody, just some big donor or something in the church, criticized him and said, "I'm going to take my money somewhere else," you know. And he just stopped and looked at her and said, "You wouldn't want a pastor that responded to things like that." And I thought that was really good.
That's good.
And she received that well. You know, she took, you know what? I don't think I would.
That's great.
You know,
yeah, that's
like, you just have to have the mettle to be who God called you to be, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
That's right. Yeah. Preach for the audience of one, serve for the audience of one, live for the audience of one. That's good advice. Oh man, this next one hits home with me right in the center of probably the busiest 3-week stretch I've had in a long time, but the pace never slows.
Yeah. I mean, when we were young, like, just starting out in the ministry, you'd preach like once a month or something like that. And it was like, oh man, this is so easy. I tell people all the time, I was like, it's not hard to preach, you know, it's hard to preach to the same people 3 times a week. That's what's hard to do. Yep. and stay interesting and not repeat yourself all the time. John MacArthur, I think I heard him say on the radio when I was in college that the constant of his life was Sunday's always coming. And pastors feel that, like, we are just constantly preparing, constantly having to produce, come up with new things. It really matters, you know, and that just takes its toll on you. It's the emotional toll of preaching, the creative toll of coming up with new messages all the time. It's over time, it grinds you down.
Yeah, you said this. I'm going to read it for you because I thought this was just so well done. 3 times each week, I write the equivalent of a well-researched college research paper. Then deliver it orally to the same group of people who heard me for the last 300 weeks, and it never ends. Well, that's a statement, man. And it's so true. My sermon for this coming Sunday is about 75% done. It's already 5 pages. I have probably 6 footnotes. I could probably turn it in, like you said, for some college paper. It's not formatted that way, you know what I mean? But it's researched. It's well done. Man, dude, that is a grind. It's a grind. And on top of that, man, how does sermon prep is one thing, but then you got a family. I mean, guys, is anybody else out there like got a family? Yeah, like 5 kids, 3 kids, 1 kid. Does it really matter? I mean, I've got my son. I'm flying to see a Kansas City Chiefs game tomorrow morning. And then as soon as I fly back, my son's got a cross country meet on Saturday morning. I mean, I'm going to get up at 4:00 in the morning, drive him to a cross country meet. And then, you know, it's just never ending. You got one, then at the younger one, then you guys potty training, growing up. It's just never, there's no place where your pace slows down. It's just not going to happen. And so what do you do? What are some things you do to kind of pause, Sabbath, break, you know?
Well, I think it's absolutely essential to take a day off every week.
Right.
I'm a big believer in having a personal Sabbath. For me, I don't touch anything between Friday at 7. My Sabbath corresponds with the Jewish Sabbath, not for any theological reason. It's just how it works for me. So 7:00 on Friday night till 7:00 on Saturday night, I'm not thinking about church or anything. I'm just completely checked out, hanging out with my family. You know, I think having healthy habits, being outdoors as much as you can be, helps a lot. part of it is just study habits, just getting into good study habits. I feel like I'm just now figuring some stuff out that if I knew 12 years ago would have helped me a lot, just on how to study regularly, how to write regularly. So yeah, that's all I can think of.
Yeah, and then the final pressure on pastors, we've kind of circled it a little bit, but it's heavy on your family.
Yeah, like all these things that we talked about hit your family too, right?
Right.
Like if you're depressed, your kids are going to see it. I actually wrote all of these and I left this one out. And I was going over with my apprentice who grew up in a pastor's family. And I said, "Is there anything you'd add?" And he said, "Yeah, all this stuff affects your kids."
Wow.
He said, "I remember somebody would leave the church and dad would be depressed and he was trying to hide it. And we could all see it. We could all tell it was really hard on him. And then that was really hard on us, Yeah.
I mean, think about it. You got the financial thing affects your kids. People, right. Like, what about the people that leave the church when they had kids that were friends with your kids?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And like explaining to your 6-year-old that you're not going to be friends anymore. I mean, not that you can't be friends, but it's just not going to work out. I mean, that's tough, man. It's tough on kids. My daughter, who's a junior in high school right now, we've worked through some of this with her, and there was a season in her life where she basically lost all of her friends over a span of time. Every close friend she had, and we became very careful with that, Ryan. And one thing that we did, we do private school. That's what we do with our family. And one thing I've done with all my kids now is encourage friendships outside of the church.
Yeah, I think that's huge.
Man, I didn't do that for a while, man. It burnt me a little bit. And now my daughter, probably her best friends, don't even go to our church. And I think it's important. And then my son, of course, they're doing sports and things outside the church. But I think that helped me. But it didn't help in the days when my daughter was basically feeling that pressure like we were. So,
yeah.
Man, that's good, brother. Wow. And all these are so spot on and so right. I appreciate the fact that you wrote the article and that you take the time to come on and share it with the audience in this kind of back and forth format. Any just word of encouragement that you'd like to leave with this group that might be hearing us talk?
Yeah. I think that there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? Like, just there's something about I've been in churches that were healthy churches where somebody stayed through the hard times and rode through to the other end. And man, there's just multiple generations of people there. There's a solid gospel witness in that area. And that's what I've always thought of. It's like, I didn't come to be a pastor, I think in decades, not in years, so I'm just getting started off of my second decade here. And I want to stay for the long term so I can see those long-term benefits.
Yeah. Man, that's so good. I think my one final word I would give specifically to middle-aged pastors is this: now that we are middle age, we have so much more to offer than when we were 20. I mean, I've been in ministry for 22 years, and not that I'm special. It just means there's been so much growth. I mean, just if all I did was study the Bible for all these years to learn to preach, how much more knowledge, biblical knowledge do I have, or experience in preaching, experience with people, patience in laboring in a church? Man, these are the sweet years, man. These are the sweet years. So don't let cynicism or bitterness or the grind keep you from the best experiences of your life.
Yeah.
Ryan, man, first of all, it's great to meet you. Secondly, I appreciate the transparency. I think you nailed it. And man, we'll look forward to maybe whatever down the road, whether it's on the radio here or in person. We'll look forward to seeing you in the future. So God bless you. We're going to include in the show notes a way to connect with Ryan through his website and also reference the actual article if you haven't seen it, as well as other things. So God bless you guys. Have a great day. We'll see you next time on the Church Advance podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode. And until next time, I want to remind you that you can subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can actually watch video versions of each episode. The video version is also available on Spotify, so make sure to follow us there. You can also catch the audio on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and wherever you may listen to podcasts. If you want to connect with Brian, then simply head over to his website, briansams.com, where you can reach out, ask a question, and get connected there. The podcast is hosted by Brian Sams. It's co-hosted and produced by myself, Luke Clayton, and the team at mustincrease.com. Thanks so much again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode as we continue to advance a reformation, a fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches right here on Church Advance with Brian Sams.